Hello and welcome to our podcast. I'm Dani, and today Great.com talks with Heather O'Keefe, the founder and executive director at StepStones for Youth. If you haven't heard of them yet, they serve young people aged 10 to 25 in and transitioning out of the foster care system. If you're new here to this podcast, press subscribe on YouTube or in a podcast app. Hi, Heather, and welcome.
Hello, thank you so much for having me.
It's a pleasure. I'm looking forward to learn more about the community that you're serving. And let's begin by knowing more about your history. Since you're a founder, I think we're going to get a closer perspective from it. So how did StepStones begin?
Well, StepStones began actually in 2004, if you can believe it. It seems like yesterday, but we started out as a program for girls with trauma and abuse history, and we operated a summer camp. It was completely volunteer run. It was kind of at the side of your desk kind of thing. I had a full-time job at the time, and so did a friend of mine, Catherine Leonard, who also founded StepStones with me. And we took our vacations and we would run a summer camp for approximately 4 weeks every summer, and we would do some fundraising throughout the year. And that's really what it was supposed to be. At the time, I was working in child protection, working in the foster care system, and I started to notice a lot of young people were coming through the system, and their parents had also gone through the system. So, a young person that was living in foster care, their parents had also been in foster care, and we saw the cycle kind of repeat itself. I also was able to look at and see a lot of young people in the foster care system doing okay. And then as soon as they were transitioning out of the foster care system, their outcomes became really, really poor. So a lot of young people were, becoming homeless. They were dropping out of high school. And these are kids who were doing quite well before, and then all of a sudden, sort of with that transition, everything was falling apart, and there was nothing to support them. And so I think it was in 2011, I took a leave of absence from my job and to start a pilot to say, okay, could this be different, right? Like, could we see a different outcome for young people from foster care? And what would be needed in order for that to be possible? So the pilot ended up lasting about 2 years, and we, put tons and tons of things into place, right? So we were looking at education, we were looking at housing, we were looking at counseling, life skills courses, all of it, right? To say, what if we could affect change, and if we could see a different outcome for young people in foster care, what would be needed in order to do that? And so at the beginning, we actually relied completely on support from the community, so private donors, private donations, corporate donations, and we really just tested this model. And after 2 years, we started to look at the importance of relationships, and how relationships in a young person's life were critically important to see the change in their outcome. And so we developed, we were looking at all these different areas, and we were able to provide support, provide services in a lot of different areas for a young person. And what we did was we tracked the outcomes. So we tracked the young person when they came into our program, so a baseline, let's say, and then we tracked them every time, every 6 months after that point. And we were looking at what were we doing and what were the outcomes that the young person was experiencing. And we did see that relationships were critically important. So I ended up continuing. I ended up leaving my position. I was working in child protection at the time, and started really developing out this program to say, you know what, we actually can see change. We can see significant change. We can see kids stay in school. We can see them graduate from high school. Get stable housing. We can see all these amazing things happening for a young person. Honestly, not very surprising, but there was a question of whether or not this was possible, right? Like, are the outcomes for kids from foster care just going to be the way they are, right? Or, could we actually do something about it? So we were able to show pretty quickly that with what I would consider minimal support, a young person was able to change their outcomes. They were able to stay in school, have stable housing, not get involved in criminal behavior, stabilize their mental health, like all of it, right? And we were doing, we were helping, but we weren't doing a lot when you think about how significant the change in outcomes were. And one of the things, again, as I said, it was the relationships. So we looked at the relationship, And a lot of young people were coming from the foster care system not having anyone in their life. So they didn't have anyone what we call as like a natural support person. So somebody who's not being paid to take care of them, somebody who's not being paid to love them or, to have a sense of belonging. And so we started to put into asking young people, what do they want? And many of the young people were like, well, we want somebody in my life. Like, I want somebody in my life. And so we looked at a mentorship program. And so we started, a mentorship program with support. The mentorship program was, showing a lot of success in terms of changing the outcomes. And when a young person felt really connected to a mentor and felt connected to what we call a long-term mentor, so somebody who's not, coming to a young person's life and then leaving a year or two later, but somebody who actually was making more of a lifetime commitment to this young person to say, I'm committing to this young person, I'm committing to their success, and I actually believe in them. And when we saw that connection happen, we saw almost every other area of a young person's life change. But we weren't there yet. So we kept looking at, we've been evaluating all the way along. And we, have a number of different programs at this point for young people to look at what do they need and how is it different. So young people from the foster care system have a significantly different experience than most people in our society, right? And yet the services that are available to young people are what I refer to as traditional services. So they're designed to support the general community in their needs, right? So a counseling service, for an example, a food bank, shelter system, that kind of thing. They're designed to support people, but generally people who in society have other people in their life, right? So they have family members, or they have extended family members, or they have community on some level. The thing that's quite different about young people from the foster care system is many times when they're exiting the foster care system, they don't actually have anyone in their life. They don't have anyone. And it's really hard to kind of imagine a world in which you have absolutely no one. But that's the reality for these young people. And so when we look at these other systems that were designed to support kids, who are struggling, or maybe who need counseling or whatever, we're often relying on the idea that they have people in their life who can help them get there, right? For an example, a 16-year-old, maybe their parent would help them make an appointment for a counseling, drive them to the counseling appointment, support them in going through that process. A young person from the foster care system might not have that in their life, right? So that's one thing. The other piece is that a lot of young people in the foster care system have actually been hurt by, and they perceive the system to have hurt them significantly. And so they don't really trust the system, which is understandable because the system has absolutely hurt them, right? And so, you're going to a young person, you're saying, hey, I'm gonna help you, and I'm gonna help you find housing, or I'm going to help you, get stable food, food security, or I'm going to connect you with a mentor. And a young person's like, I'm not sure that's a good idea, because every other time I've said yes to help, it's ended up in me not doing very well or being hurt. And I think so it's a protective factor for sure. And so when we're working with young people from the foster care system, I think we have to look at it differently, and we have to actually acknowledge that their experience has been quite different, and then design support services and support around that fact. And so that's one of the things that StepStones has been focusing on for the last, 12, 13, 14 years, is really just how do we design a program, a support network that really meets the needs of these youth. So in addition to the mentorship program that we have housing subsidies, we have housing grants, we have emergency support, we have workers who support the young person. In addition to all that, we also started to see that there was really interesting research coming out of the States and some places in Europe, that there was some ability for young people from the foster care system to look back into their past and to find connections that had been severed earlier on in their lives, and to reestablish those connections. And so we started looking at that, and we thought, okay, let's try another pilot. Let's see if maybe instead of just doing mentorship and just, doing traditional support services, what if we started doing that? What if we started looking at a young person's life and saying, is there anybody in this person's life who loved them, who wanted to care for them, who maybe for many different reasons, the relationship was cut off. And obviously safe people and people who are supportive. So we engage in what's called a mobility map at the beginning. And so what that is really just kind of like going through a young person's life and saying, okay, when you were in grade 1, what school did you go to? Where did you live? Who did you live with? Right. And the thing is about young people is that in foster care is actually that's very complicated, right? Because young people actually move foster homes. Statistically, they move foster homes once every year that they're in foster care. So if you've been in foster care for 7 years, then you've moved 7 different times. Which means you've had 7 different homes, 7 different schools, 7 different sibling groups, right? Or foster sibling groups. You've had different coaches, you've had everything. Like all of your community completely gets uprooted, and then you switch to another place. So we know this, right? And so when you're doing a mobility map with a young person, you're going, okay, so where were you in grade 1? Where were you in grade 2? Where are you in grade 3? And often those places are quite different, right? And they're all over the map. And we predominantly work in Ontario right now. So they're all over Ontario. They're moving around, they're moving schools, they're moving homes, and they meet in tons of people. We're talking like hundreds of people we can get on this mobility map. And then we start asking the young person, like, tell me about that person. Did you like that person? Were they supportive? Were they nice? Like, tell me more. Why did you stop seeing that person? And in certain circumstances, we've been able to identify that some of those people actually were really positive influences in their life. We were able to do safety checks and make sure that those people actually genuinely are safe and supportive in their life. And then we are able to ask the young person, do you want to reconnect to that person? Would you consider having a relationship with that person? And this is all based on the idea that supportive relationships, natural relationships, so unpaid support people in a person's life, are actually way more effective at creating change than any other type of relationship. So if that person actually loves them, they feel belonging to them, they care about them, then they are more likely, the young person is more likely to stabilize. So it's based on that research. We started looking into it, and we've been having tons and tons of success in that area, in terms of trying to find young people, their people. And developing support networks around them. Much more kind of, a traditional way of looking at supporting a young person, or if you really want to, talk about it like from the perspective of a community raises a child, right? This is truly it, but we're doing it actively, right? We're seeking these people out actively and asking them to engage with a young person and say, hey, what could you do? Could you help them? Could you help them go and see their colleges or universities? And, people are like, yeah, sure, I can totally do that, or can you help them they need to find an apartment? Okay, yeah, sure, I can totally do that. They need some advice on schooling or tutoring or any of the things that we usually outsource to social work, or to workers or to community agencies. We're saying, actually, there's a lot of people in this young person's life that would love to do that for free, one, and also because they actually care about the young person, which it goes, way further for someone than somebody's getting paid to do it. So that's kind of what we look at now. We look at, we also have a mentorship program. We also, we call our connection building program. So we, build connections through a young person's life so that they can rely on those connections long term. We also have a housing subsidy program to address the housing crisis that we see in our communities these days. And so to make sure that young people don't become homeless so that they can stay in school and they can continue on their educational journey. And then we have, emergency support services as well. We also have some counseling support as well for young people so that they can choose a counselor, get support from a counselor, and then be able to move on through what we call like a permanency journey so that they can actually find permanency in their life, so they can find people, really so that they don't have to rely on us anymore, and they don't have to rely on any really social service system out there, but they can rely on their own community of support. And that's where we see the most success.
That's wonderful. And I think this concept of, having control of your own life, right? So the sustainability of the change that you provide for these kids, I think that's absolutely paramount. And we can see how you pay attention to that on the programs that you establish, in StepStones. And another thing that I really like to highlight here is this. I think that's the base or the center of your, at least in my perspective, of your programs, that is connections, right? Relationships, because it's not just about offering the help, but I love this idea of the building connections program. I think that's in the root of a good life. You need to have good connections. So it's brilliant that you actually saw that in your programs, like you had this perception and invested on it. I think it's brilliant. Yeah.
Thank you so much. And the interesting thing about it too is building connections when you think about your life. Like I think when we went through the pandemic, we realized, how important connections were in our lives, right? And how when we couldn't have those connections, how much loss there was. And so we've kind of all gone through that, and we've started to re-examine what living is and what life is and what makes us happy and what makes us motivated. And a lot of the times it actually has a lot to do with who is in our life, and how we interact with those people. The challenge here, though, is how do you create that out of nothing? Right. So if you don't have those connections, how do you then create those connections? And, especially how do you create those connections for people who've had a lot of hurt and a lot of people who've let them down? Right. So connections for a lot of kids in foster care, not everybody, but for a lot of kids, is that have been quite hurtful. And adults have hurt them over the course of their life in different ways. And so we also have to kind of address that piece of it. And so that's one of the big challenges that we've been having throughout the years, is how do you kind of create that at an organizational level, so that we can replicate it over and over and over again. And we can also meet the unique needs of young people who are going through our program. And then in addition to that, how can we look at supporting other organizations in being able to do this work? Because the truth is that, kids from foster care sort of touch all the different areas of our society, right? So they are involved in many, many different support systems in our society. So for an example, a kid from foster care is 193 times more likely to become homeless than another young, like their peer. Okay. So I think right now, I think the estimate is, 61% of young people who are currently homeless are actually had child protection involvement. So how do we, support shelters and support people working in the homeless sector in order to be able to create this change within their sectors? We also know that kids from foster care graduate high school only at a 46% rate, which is obviously incredibly low. And so again, in the education system, how do we support and create the conditions in an education system to be able to allow these young people to thrive? Right. And so that's kind of our next thing is, it's our next kind of part that we're going to be hoping to go down, is being able to support these other systems. We also know that there's a higher representation of young people in the criminal justice system who are come from the foster care system. One, how do we prevent that from happening? And two, how do we empower the criminal justice system to start supporting these young people in a different way, so that we can actually stop this from happening, and we can stop the cycle from happening over and over again. And so, yes, it works. Like what we're doing works. And, when you put different things into place that a young person needs, it works. And we've been able to see, honestly, incredible success in the outcomes of young people. So it's pretty exciting. How different things turn out, right? When you put some of these things into place. And so the question then is how do we create that for all young people who are exiting foster care? Because there's thousands of kids entering into the system every year in Canada, and honestly across the world, right? In lots of different, like, we're not unique. Canada is not unique to this problem. In the US, they have very, very similar outcomes for young people from foster care, which were not good. In Europe, similar, outcomes. Australia, New Zealand, like very similar outcomes you can see in those countries for young people who are exiting the foster care system. And that's what we know. We don't even know a whole, other places. So can we replicate it? And how do we replicate it, and how do we scale it so that, every young person from the foster care system, in my opinion, has the right, deserves this, and it's our society that's letting them down, right? So when a young person enters the foster care system, they've been removed from their family, right, in some way, and then essentially the government takes over parenting this child, and we know that the government, we're not doing a good job. right? The outcomes are really, really poor. And so we as a society, in my opinion, are responsible for keeping these kids safe, right? But currently we're really not. And so how do we keep doing that, keep putting these things into place so that we can keep these kids safe long term? That's the next question.
Well, I completely share your opinion. I think we need to step up as a society and bridge this gap, because the government clearly will not do it. Not, no government, I think, will be able to do that. And for everyone listening, actually, I just want to make a quick pause here to tell you to go to their page, which is stepstonesforyouth.com. You can get more information and you can actually see more of the impact that they are making in Canada. It's really, really great. And with that, I'm going to move to my next question, Heather. That is for everyone that got interested and want to be part of your initiative. What are the best ways to help StepStones for Youth keep going?
All right. Well, the first thing is that this issue doesn't really touch the lives of those with privilege and those with power. And so one of the most important things I think people can do is talk about it. A lot of people don't know this, they don't know that there's anything wrong with the situation. They think, kids are in foster care, they're safe, they're good, everything's fine. But they don't really realize that when a young person is being kicked out of the foster care system, and usually that happens at around the age of 18, that everything falls apart for them. And that all of this investment into these young people, maybe during the while they're in foster care, it's just all gone. And so really talking about it, telling people about it, bringing attention to the issue, doing the research piece, that's really important. It is a bit of a commitment to become a mentor, to become a lifetime support for a young person. Of course, we're always looking for that. But if you're not able or in a position to do that, then of course there's other ways to get involved. There's ways to help us with events. We have a weekly dinner for all the young people to build community, to build trust for kids from the foster care system, and getting involved in any of our fundraising activities. We rely heavily on donations from the community. It is the only way that we have survived. It's the only way that we're able to do the work that we do. So if you're in a position to be able to give, of course, that's the biggest impact to allow us to continue our work, but also to advocate for change. And I think that's one of the key things here is that this can be different. We have shown that with what I consider, again, minimal investment into these young people, that outcomes can significantly change. And, we do need to start saying, as a community, are we responsible for these outcomes, and can they be different? And the answer, as far as I'm concerned, is they can be. We've been able to show it through the work that we've been doing, that the outcomes can significantly change. And, I think sometimes people think of kids and kids that we work with in a negative light, and they think, well, maybe they're tough kids, or maybe they're scary, or they're anything like that. And really, when you meet young people that are coming out of the foster care system, when you meet kids in our program, people are just blown away. They're blown away by the creativity, by the kindness, by the intelligence, by all of these young people are bringing to the table. And yet we're just willing to walk away from all of those things, right? We're walking away from because we're not providing the structure that these young people need to thrive. And when we create the structure that these people need to thrive in, then we see incredible things. Right. I actually wasn't a kid in foster care. So I came from a home where I had, stable home. I had stable family. And because of that stability, and because they continue, I'm old now, and I still call my parents, and I still rely on them for support, and I still rely on my extended family for support. Even during this thing, my aunt is calling me, and, I'm very much involved in family, and I'm very much involved in my community. And it's only because of that I have been able to do what I've been able to do. And I think we forget that sometimes. We think that we're independent. We think that we've just done it all on our own. But the reality is we're not. We're all interdependent. And that's how we can be successful, right? And that's really what we believe in strongly at StepStones, and what we can see is significantly changes a young person's trajectory. So really getting it out there, creating change, advocating for us to invest into these young people, and build those support networks. So Erwin Ellman, who is the provincial advocate before in Ontario, once said to me that he asked young people what they wanted. And one of the answers that the young people from the foster care system said is they wanted to belong. They just wanted to belong, and they wanted people to care about them. And so he took that to the government, and he says, to the government, he says, like, this is what young people are saying to me. This is what they want, that they want to belong. They want people to love them. That's what they want. And that's what they don't have. And, some people at the government said, yeah, okay, that's great. But like, how do you do that from a policy point of view? Right. And how do you do that from an organizational point of view? So, Erwin brought it back to the young people, and he says to the young people, so, this is what the government's saying. And I think it's a legitimate concern. Like, how do you do that? And they said, yeah, you're right. It is difficult to create a policy that says somebody has to love somebody, but it's not difficult to create a policy or to create a structure that enables the entire system and enables a structure where that can thrive, where love and belonging can actually thrive. And that is possible, right? So you can't say to somebody, you have to love this young person, but you can create the conditions for it to happen. And I thought that was really, really interesting from the perspective of what do we need to do as a society, and how can we create a scalable version of this to create the conditions for young people from foster care, where they can find belonging, where they can find love, where they can find people to care about them, where they can therefore, as a result of that relationship, as a result of those support networks, be able to graduate from high school, be able to go to post-secondary education, be able to avoid homelessness. And and homelessness creates such a risk factor for young people. It puts them at significant risk of human trafficking, drug addictions, gang involvement. Like that's where young people are being picked up from these shelter systems, right? And so if we can prevent that from happening, we can prevent them from ever getting into a situation where they have to be homeless, then we can prevent all these other things from happening as well. And so it really isn't overly complicated. It's really about saying to a young person, let's create a network of people around you. Let's make sure you don't become homeless, and let's keep you in school. And then when we put those factors in, those three factors in, we see pretty much everything else fall into place. And so I think as a community, that is what we need to start doing. And we need to start asking those people in positions of power to do that for these young people. And we're going to see such significant changes across the board. So it's exciting for me because it's possible. In Ontario, about 1,000 of these kids exit the foster care system every year and enter into these stats that we talked about. And you can see more of the stats of, the outcomes, traditional outcomes for young people from foster care. And they enter into those stats. But so 1,000 is a lot of young people, right? That's a lot of people's lives that really could, things could be significantly different for. But 1,000 young people is also something we can do. Right? Like it's not totally out there. It's not completely unmanageable, right? We can actually solve this problem. And if we solve this problem, we're solving all sorts of other social problems in our communities related to the young people. So from my perspective, it's very exciting. And I would just encourage people to get involved. Follow us on social, follow what we're doing. We also post, research and things that are happening in the community and in other areas of the world. We also have a research portal on our website, so you can go in and kind of see research that's happening in these areas. Researchers who've done things internationally. We also have some areas where we look at innovative solutions that are happening internationally, and we continue to update our website with that information. We also have another portal for young people, but anyone's able to use it, and that is services available, so counseling services or services in the community that might be helpful. And then of course we always are encouraging people to get involved and start spreading the word, telling people about it, having I'm happy to come to speaking engagements and things like that, so that we can just get that word out there. So please connect with us on the website or on social, and I think that's the best way to get involved at the beginning.
That's perfect. And thank you so much, Heather, for talking to us today. I think we learned a lot about, one, the issues in the social system, and two, the great way that you found to give these kids a way out, a better way out from the system. So thank you for all the work that you do and for sharing this with us today.
Well, thank you so much for having me, and thanks for spreading the word for us too.
And for everybody listening, also, thank you so much. And remember, if you enjoyed the episode, press subscribe on YouTube or in your podcast app, because that shows the algorithms that this is an important conversation and more people can learn about the importance of StepStones for youth. Check their webpage, get involved if you can, and I see you in the next episode. Bye.